Don't believe this common myth that all difficult people are just misunderstood. The truth is, some people are stuck in toxic patterns that affect not only their own lives, but also everyone around them. If you've ever dealt with someone who never takes responsibility, demands the world revolve around them, or refuses to change, you know exactly what I mean. In this video, we're diving deep into the kinds of people that can drain your energy, block progress, and leave you feeling frustrated. From chronic blamers to those self-entitled individuals who expect special treatment wherever they go, these behaviors aren't just harmless quirks. They can have real consequences on both personal and professional relationships. We'll explore why some people refuse to take accountability, cling to outdated ways of thinking, and how they manipulate others to get what they want. But more importantly, we'll unpack the emotional layers behind these behaviors and ask some big questions. Can these people change? And how should we respond when we encounter them in our own lives? Stick around, because by the end, you might start seeing these behaviors and the people who exhibit them in a whole new light. Let's dive into the first 3 sections for your voiceover script in the requested format. I'll focus on creating an emotional journey that moves from happiness to core content, followed by nostalgia and finally curiosity, with a relatable tone for your audience. Number 1. Self-centered people. When everything revolves around them. Picture this. You're sitting with a group of friends, laughing, enjoying the moment. The conversation is flowing and you're eager to share some exciting news. Maybe you just booked a weekend getaway you've been dreaming of. Or perhaps you achieved a milestone at work you've worked hard for. The happiness is contagious and everyone's buzzing with good vibes. You're about to share, but before you can get the words out, someone jumps in. They start talking about their problems, how they never get to travel, how their job is miserable, or how life is unfair. Suddenly, the spotlight shifts entirely to them. Your excitement dims. The moment that was supposed to be about your joy is now hijacked by someone who constantly needs to be the center of attention. We've all been there, haven't we? That one friend or family member who always manages to make everything about them. You can probably think of someone right now. They're the person who never seems to ask how you're doing, and when you share something, they redirect the conversation back to themselves. No matter the situation, their problems, their feelings, and their experiences take center stage. Self-centered people can be emotionally draining. It's like shouting into a void. Your words don't seem to matter because their world is all that exists. Stoicism teaches us that we must preserve our energy and focus on what we can control. But how do you handle it when it's someone close to you? Do you walk away, distance yourself, or do you try to help them see beyond their narrow view? Now, think back to a time when you were a kid, playing with a group of friends. Everyone had their own little role in the play. Maybe you were building a fort together or riding bikes around the neighborhood. But there was always that one kid who needed to be the hero of the story, right? They had to be the leader, the one who decided what game to play, how to play it, and when to stop. Back then, it was frustrating, but you let it slide. After all, kids grow out of that, right? Except some don't. As adults, this behavior often evolves into more subtle, yet equally exhausting habits. They monopolize conversations, dismiss your emotions, and expect you to always be there for them, but rarely offer the same in return. You can't help but wonder, what would it take to get them to truly listen? Is there a way to break through their self-centeredness, or are they trapped in a cycle they don't even recognize? Curiosity sparks the question, is it possible for self-centered individuals to change? Could they ever develop empathy, or are they too ingrained in their ways? What makes a person that way? Is it something from their past, or is it simply who they are? As you reflect on the self-centered people in your life, you might find yourself wondering, how much longer can you tolerate it? Is it time to step back and protect your own energy? Number 2, the opportunist, exploiting kindness for personal gain. Now imagine for a moment that you're the kind of person who loves helping others. Maybe it's the warmth you feel when you see someone's eyes light up with gratitude, or perhaps it's the satisfaction of knowing you've made a positive difference in someone's life. You're always there for your friends and family, willing to lend a hand, give advice, or support them in any way you can. It feels good, doesn't it? But then one day you realize something. There's that one person in your circle who seems to ask for your help more than anyone else. It starts small, a favor here, a bit of advice there. But soon it feels like they're leaning on you for everything, even things they could easily handle on their own. You start to notice the pattern. They never seem to return the favor, and in fact, they often guilt-trip you into helping them. They say things like, "I thought we were friends," or "I really need you, can't you help me just this once?" But it's never just once, is it? And somehow, you always end up feeling like the bad guy when you hesitate. This is the opportunist, a person who takes advantage of your kindness, using it to their benefit while giving nothing in return. Think back to a time in your childhood when you had a friend who always asked for help on school projects. Maybe they were charming or persuasive, but somehow they always got you to do more than your fair share. At first, you didn't mind. It felt good to be needed. But over time, you started to realize that they weren't just asking for help. They were using you to get ahead without putting in the effort themselves. And it hurt, didn't it? That moment of realization when you saw the relationship for what it really was. As adults, the opportunist takes on a more refined approach, but the impact is the same. They might come to you with their problems, expecting you to solve them. They may even mask their requests as friendship or loyalty, but deep down, you know they're only in it for what they can gain. And when the tables are turned, when you need help, they're nowhere to be found. It makes you wonder, why do some people feel entitled to take advantage of others? What drives them to manipulate kindness for personal gain? Is it insecurity, a lack of self-sufficiency, or simply a selfish nature? And more importantly, how do you protect yourself from falling into their trap? Could there be a way to set boundaries without feeling guilty or losing the warmth of human connection? You start to think about the people in your life. Are there opportunists lurking among them? And if so, how can you address it without causing conflict? It's a tricky balance, preserving your own energy while still being there for those who truly need it. You can't help but be curious. How do others navigate this fine line between kindness and self-respect? Number 3, people who create their own illusions, trapped in make-believe worlds. Let's take a step into another familiar scene. You're talking to someone who's always got a story to tell. Maybe they're bragging about their latest accomplishment, or perhaps they're spinning a tale of how everyone else is wrong, and they're always the victim. At first, you listen, nodding along politely. But as the conversation continues, you start to realize something. What they're saying doesn't quite add up. They've created this entire narrative in their head, one where they're always the hero or the victim, but never at fault. They live in a world of their own illusions, unable to see reality for what it is. We've all known someone like this. They twist facts, exaggerate their successes, and downplay their mistakes. It's frustrating, isn't it? You want to help them see the truth, but every time you try, they shut down or change the subject. They're so wrapped up in their own story that they can't or won't see the bigger picture. Do you remember when you were a kid playing make-believe with friends? Maybe you pretended to be a superhero, or a princess, or an adventurer exploring uncharted lands. It was fun to step into a fantasy world for a while, but eventually you had to come back to reality. For some people, though, that fantasy never ends. They grow up, but they never stop living in their own version of reality. It's as if they're still playing pretend, but now the stakes are much higher. As adults, people who live in their own illusions can be incredibly difficult to deal with. They may refuse to take responsibility for their actions, insisting that the world is against them. Or they might inflate their achievements, trying to convince everyone, especially themselves, that they're more successful than they really are. And no matter how much you try to show them the truth, they cling to their illusions, unwilling to face reality. You can't help but wonder, what causes someone to create these mental walls? Are they protecting themselves from something? Is it fear, insecurity, or a deep-seated need to be seen as something they're not? And more importantly, can they ever break free from the stories they've built around themselves? What would it take for them to finally see the world as it truly is? You start to feel curious. Could you be living in your own illusion, even just a little? Are there stories you tell yourself to avoid facing uncomfortable truths? And if so, how do you begin to dismantle those illusions and face reality head-on? It's a challenging thought, but one that's worth exploring. Number 4, those who never admit their mistakes, avoiding accountability. Think of a time when you were part of a group project, perhaps at work or back in school, and everything was going smoothly until someone made a mistake. It was a minor hiccup, one that could have been easily resolved if acknowledged early, but instead, the person responsible simply refused to admit it. They dodged the blame, made excuses, and even started pointing fingers at everyone else. At first, you might have brushed it off thinking it happens, but as the situation dragged on, the frustration grew. The more they refused to take responsibility, the bigger the problem became. This scenario is all too common, isn't it? We've all encountered people who simply can't admit when they're wrong. They'll twist facts, justify their actions, or even try to rewrite history just to avoid saying the words, "I made a mistake." It's as if their pride is more important than solving the issue at hand, and in the process, they create more tension and confusion for everyone involved. It's a tough pill to swallow when someone you know refuses to own up to their actions. Whether it's a colleague, a friend, or even a family member, their inability to accept responsibility can be draining. Accountability is a sign of maturity and emotional intelligence, but those who lack it often cause ripple effects that affect everyone around them. Think about how many times situations could have been easily fixed with a simple admission of fault, but instead, they spiraled out of control because someone refused to own up. Nostalgia might take you back to childhood, when mistakes were a natural part of growing up. Do you remember being a kid, playing with your siblings or friends and making a mess? Maybe you spilled juice on the carpet or accidentally broke a toy. Back then, admitting your mistake was met with a quick sorry, followed by a laugh or a helping hand to clean up. There was an innocence to it. Owning up to your mistakes wasn't that hard. Sure, there might have been a scolding or a timeout, but it wasn't the end of the world. So when did that change? As adults, the fear of admitting a mistake often becomes tied to pride, ego, and the desire to appear infallible. Some people simply can't bear the thought of being wrong, and so they avoid accountability at all costs. But what's the real impact of that behavior? How much damage is done when someone refuses to acknowledge their mistakes, both in their personal and professional relationships? It makes you curious, doesn't it? Can people who avoid accountability ever change? Is it possible for someone so deeply entrenched in their pride to learn humility and take responsibility for their actions? And what drives this fear of being wrong in the first place? Could it be rooted in past experiences or a deep-seated insecurity? As you think about the people in your life who struggle with accountability, you can't help but wonder, what would it take to help them see the power in admitting their mistakes? Number 5, people who don't prepare for the future. Wasting potential. Imagine this. You're sitting with a group of friends talking about the future. Some are excitedly sharing their plans for personal growth, career development, or maybe even retirement. The conversation is filled with ideas, goals, and dreams. But then There's that one person in the group who shrugs it all off. They say things like, "I'll figure it out later," or "I'm not worried about the future." While everyone else is setting goals and planning ahead, they seem content to drift, living day by day without much thought for what's coming next. At first, it might not seem like a big deal. After all, there's something to be said for living in the moment. But over time, you start to notice the consequences of their lack of preparation. Missed opportunities, financial struggles, and a growing sense of stagnation become a part of their reality. You might even feel a bit frustrated watching someone with so much potential squander it because they aren't willing to think ahead. We've all known people like this, those who have the talent, the intelligence, and the drive, but lack the foresight to prepare for what's coming. Whether it's in their career, their finances, or their personal life, they seem to be stuck in the present, never considering how their actions today will impact their future. It's not just about planning for retirement or career advancement. It's about building a life that's sustainable and fulfilling in the long term. And when you see someone neglecting that, it can be difficult to watch. Think back to your younger days when the future felt so far away. Maybe it was during high school or college when you were still figuring out what you wanted to do with your life. Back then, it was easy to live in the moment, wasn't it? There was no rush to make big decisions, and the idea of planning for the future seemed like something for grown-ups. But eventually, reality hit. You realized that if you didn't start preparing, life could easily pass you by. Now, as an adult, you understand the importance of planning ahead. But for those who don't, the future can become a source of stress and uncertainty. They might not realize it now, but their lack of preparation is setting them up for a life full of missed opportunities. And that's the real tragedy, isn't it? Watching someone with so much potential waste it because they aren't willing to think ahead. It sparks a sense of curiosity. What stops people from preparing for the future? Is it fear of the unknown, a lack of motivation, or perhaps a misguided belief that everything will work out on its own? And can people like this ever change? Is there a way to help them see the value in planning ahead, or are they doomed to repeat the same mistakes over and over again? Number 6, negative thinkers, perpetually focusing on life's problems. Now, let's shift to a more familiar scenario. You're catching up with someone, a friend, a co-worker, maybe even a family member, and as soon as the conversation starts, it's clear where it's heading. They begin to complain about everything, from their job to the weather to their relationships. Nothing seems to be going right in their life. You try to offer solutions, maybe even a silver lining, but no matter what you say, they're stuck in a cycle of negativity. Every positive suggestion you make is met with a "yeah, but..." It feels like they're determined to find the cloud in every silver lining. You've probably encountered negative thinkers more often than you'd like to admit. They're the people who always seem to focus on what's wrong rather than what's right. And the worst part? Their negativity can be contagious. Spending too much time around them can start to bring you down too. You might find yourself feeling drained after every interaction, as if their problems have somehow become your own. It's frustrating, isn't it? You want to help, to show them that life isn't as bleak as they make it out to be, but it's like hitting a brick wall. No matter how much you try to shift the conversation toward the positive, they pull it right back into the negative. And over time, you start to wonder, why do they see the world this way? Is it something they've experienced, or is it just how they're wired? Looking back on your own life, there were probably times when things weren't going great. Maybe you struggled with a job you didn't like, or went through a tough breakup, but even in those moments there was always a glimmer of hope, right? A belief that things would get better. For negative thinkers, that hope seems to be absent. They're so focused on what's going wrong that they can't see the potential for things to go right. It makes you curious. Why are some people so entrenched in negativity? Is it a result of their upbringing, past experiences, or perhaps a deeper psychological issue? And can they ever break free from that mindset? What would it take for a negative thinker to start seeing the good in life rather than constantly focusing on the bad? You wonder if there's a way to help them, to show them that life isn't as bleak as they perceive it to be. Or perhaps the real question is, should you even try? How much of your own energy are you willing to spend on someone who might not want to change? Number 7, chronic blamers, refusing to take responsibility. Imagine this, you're working on a team project and things aren't going as smoothly as you hoped. Deadlines are being missed, tasks are falling through the cracks, and tensions are rising. But instead of coming together to find a solution, there's one person in the group who has made it their mission to point fingers. It's never their fault. It's always someone else's mistake. They'll blame the system, the circumstances, or even the people around them, but never once will they look in the mirror. We've all encountered people like this, chronic blamers. At first you might sympathize with them. Maybe they had a rough day, or perhaps something out of their control really did go wrong. But over time, it becomes clear that blaming others is their default setting. No matter what the situation is, they refuse to take responsibility for their role in it. And as a result, the people around them end up bearing the brunt of their failures. It's frustrating, isn't it? When someone refuses to take responsibility, it not only creates tension, but it also prevents any real progress from being made. Instead of addressing the issue head-on, they're more concerned with deflecting blame and protecting their own ego. And the worst part? Chronic blamers often drag others down with them. In their effort to avoid accountability, they'll throw anyone under the bus, friends, colleagues, even family members. This brings back memories of times when responsibility was a shared value, back when you were younger and part of a sports team, school club, or even family chores. Do you remember how easy it was to take responsibility for small things, like forgetting to bring your gear or missing a meeting? Sure, there were consequences, but owning up to your mistakes was part of growing up. Back then, everyone had to pull their weight, and there was a certain pride in being responsible, wasn't there? But somewhere along the way, for chronic blamers, that sense of responsibility gets lost. Maybe they had experiences that taught them it was easier to avoid blame than to face it. Or perhaps they grew up in environments where deflecting accountability was a survival skill. Whatever the case, they carry this habit into adulthood, where it creates friction in both personal and professional relationships. It makes you curious. What drives people to become chronic blamers? Is it fear of failure, insecurity, or something deeper? And more importantly, can they ever learn to take responsibility? You might wonder if it's even possible for someone so deeply ingrained in the blame game to change their ways. Or are they destined to repeat the same pattern, always deflecting responsibility, never truly growing? Number 8. Self-entitled people, expecting the world to bend for them. Picture this. You're in line at a coffee shop, patiently waiting your turn. Suddenly, someone waltzes in and cuts right to the front. They demand immediate attention, acting as if the rules don't apply to them. Maybe they flash a knowing smile. Maybe they say something like, "I'm in a hurry," as if their time is more valuable than yours. You watch in disbelief as they get exactly what they want, while everyone else is left standing there, fuming. This is the behavior of a self-entitled person, someone who believes the world revolves around them, and that they deserve special treatment simply because, well, they exist. They expect to be first in line, to get the best seat, to receive the biggest piece of the pie, all without putting in any extra effort. And when they don't get their way, they throw a fit or act as though they've been wronged by some great injustice. Self-entitled people can be exhausting to deal with. They not only take more than their fair share, but they also create an environment where others feel undervalued or overlooked. Whether it's at work, in social settings, or even within families, their entitlement becomes a source of frustration for everyone around them. And the most frustrating part, they often don't see anything wrong with their behavior. In their minds, they truly believe they deserve more than everyone else. Thinking back to earlier days, do you remember when things were more equal? When you and your friends would split everything down the middle, whether it was snacks, chores, or time spent playing a game. There was a fairness to it, a sense of balance. Everyone got a turn and no one expected to get more than their share. But somewhere along the way, that balance shifted for some people. Entitlement began to creep in, and suddenly they felt like they deserved more, simply because they believed they were more important. It's curious, isn't it? What makes a person become so self-entitled? Is it the result of being spoiled or always getting their way growing up? Or is it rooted in deeper psychological factors like insecurity or a need for validation? You wonder if self-entitled people are even aware of how they come across. Do they genuinely believe they're better than others, or is it all a mask for something else? And perhaps the bigger question, can they ever learn to see the world through a different lens? Or are they destined to continue expecting more than they deserve? Number 9, people resistant to change, stuck in old ways, blocking progress. Now, imagine you're part of a team that's trying to implement a new process at work. It's an exciting change, one that could improve efficiency and make everyone's job a little easier. But there's one person who isn't on board. They refuse to adapt, constantly complaining about how things used to be better or how the old way worked just fine. They resist every suggestion, every improvement, clinging to the past as if it's a lifeline. People who are resistant to change can be some of the most challenging to work with. They're stuck in their ways, often out of fear or comfort, and their resistance not only slows progress, but also dampens the enthusiasm of those around them. It's frustrating, isn't it, when someone's unwillingness to adapt holds back the entire team or organization, all because they're afraid to step out of their comfort zone. This resistance to change isn't just limited to the workplace, though. We see it in our personal lives, too. Whether it's a family member who refuses to embrace new technology or a friend who's stuck in outdated habits, change can be intimidating for some people. They cling to what's familiar, even if it's no longer serving them, simply because it's easier than facing the unknown. Remember when you were younger and change was a part of everyday life? Whether it was moving to a new grade in school, learning a new skill, or making new friends, change was something you adapted to without much thought. Sure, there might have been moments of anxiety, but for the most part, you embraced the new experiences that came your way. But for some people, that willingness to adapt fades over time. Instead of embracing change, they fear it, and that fear keeps them stuck in old patterns. It makes you curious. Why do some people fear change so much? Is it a result of past experiences where change led to something negative? Or is it simply a comfort thing, a desire to hold on to what's familiar, even if it's no longer beneficial? And more importantly, can people who are resistant to change ever learn to embrace it? Is there a way to help them see that change can be positive, or are they destined to remain stuck in their old ways, forever blocking progress? At the end of the day, recognizing these types of people in your life is the first step toward protecting your energy and peace of mind. You can't change people who aren't ready or willing to change themselves, but you can choose how you respond to them. Whether it's distancing yourself from their negativity, setting boundaries, or simply acknowledging their impact, it's essential to prioritize your well-being. Remember, your energy is valuable. Don't waste it on people who drain it instead of uplifting it. Drop a 100 if you've made it this far. It shows you're part of that rare 0.01% who actually finish what they start. And that's no small feat. If you're serious about leveling up your life and mindset, be sure to join our growing community by subscribing to the channel. Stay tuned for more insights that can truly make a difference in how you approach life's challenges.